Right, tariffs, those delightful little taxes countries slap on imported goods, making them more expensive. They're like the hidden fees of the international shopping world, adding a little extra sting to the price tag. Think of them as a bouncer at the club of international trade, deciding who gets in and how much they have to pay at the door. It's not just about keeping the riffraff out, it's about controlling the flow and making sure the right people pay the right price. Sometimes these tariffs are there to protect fledgling local businesses. Imagine a small factory trying to compete with giant international corporations. Tariffs can give them a fighting chance. Other times they're wielded like a particularly clumsy sledgehammer in a very, very loud international argument. It's not always about finesse, sometimes it's about making a big, noisy statement. Enter former President Donald Trump, a man whose approach to international trade policy was, shall we say, unconventional. He didn't just tweak the rules, he rewrote the playbook. His signature slogan, America First, translated into a veritable blizzard of new tariffs on a vast array of goods. It was a bold move, shaking up the status quo in ways that hadn't been seen in decades. Steel, aluminum, washing machines, solar panels, even Canadian lumber, you name it. There was probably a tariff considered for it. The list was long and varied, touching many aspects of daily life and industry. The stated logic was that these tariffs would make foreign goods significantly more expensive, encouraging American consumers and businesses to buy American-made products instead. It was a strategy aimed at boosting domestic production and jobs. Simple, right? Like a diet plan that just cryptically says, eat less cake. But as anyone who's tried dieting knows, the devil is in the details. The global economy is more complex than a single-page, vaguely threatening diet plan. It's a web of interconnections and dependencies that can't be easily untangled. Buckle up, folks, it's going to be an economically bumpy and occasionally infuriating ride. The twists and turns of trade policy can leave even the experts feeling a bit queasy. So, what was the grand strategy behind Trump's tariff offensive? What was the underlying game plan that drove these bold economic moves? The core idea was America First. This slogan encapsulated a vision of prioritizing American interests above all else. The primary stated goal was to reduce the United States' trade deficits with other countries, particularly with economic powerhouses like China. These deficits were seen as a drain on the American economy. Trump viewed these deficits as a sign of America being ripped off, and he was determined to be the strongman who put a stop to it, one tariff at a time. He believed that by imposing tariffs, he could level the playing field. Another key objective was the revitalization of American manufacturing. The administration aimed to bring back jobs that had been lost to overseas competition. By making imported goods like steel and aluminum more expensive, the administration hoped to incentivize domestic production. This was seen as a way to boost local industries and create jobs. Furthermore, these tariffs were often wielded as a negotiating tactic. They were used to bring other countries to the table and extract better trade deals for the United States. The Trump administration frequently used the imposition, or even just the threat, of tariffs to pressure other countries into trade concessions. This approach was intended to secure more favorable terms for American businesses. Finally, there was an undeniable element of national security invoked in some of these tariff decisions, especially concerning steel and aluminum. The administration argued that a strong domestic production base was essential for national defense. This added a layer of patriotic urgency to the economic arguments, framing tariffs not just as a tool for prosperity, but as a necessity for security in an uncertain world. The message was clear: economic strength was intertwined with national security. Now, while the America First rhetoric might have played well at rallies, the sober economists at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, were less than enthusiastic. The OECD's warnings were stark and consistent. They projected that escalating tariffs, particularly those between the US and China, would act as a significant drag on global economic growth. Their models showed that these import taxes would disrupt supply chains, increase business uncertainty, and ultimately lead to slower GDP growth. The OECD highlighted that no one really wins a trade war. It's more a case of figuring out who loses the least. The OECD's reports essentially painted a picture of a global economy stumbling under the weight of these new trade barriers. Their message was clear: these tariffs were less a solution and more a significant part of the problem. So, did Trump's tariffs actually bring back a flood of manufacturing jobs to the good old US of A as promised? The answer isn't as straightforward as one might hope. Well, the picture is complicated. While the intention was to boost American manufacturing, the reality is a mixed bag. While some specific industries like steel and aluminum production did see a modest uptick in employment initially, this was not a universal trend. This initial boost was often offset by job losses in other sectors, creating a ripple effect that wasn't always positive. Consider the American automotive industry, a massive employer that spans across multiple states and communities. When tariffs drove up the prices of these essential metals, the cost implications were significant. Manufacturers faced a difficult choice: absorb the costs and make less money, or pass them on to consumers, potentially hurting sales and demand. Passing on the costs to consumers often led to higher prices for cars, which could deter potential buyers and slow down the market. Studies from groups like the Center for Automotive Research predicted net job losses in the auto sector as a direct consequence of these trade policies, highlighting the unintended consequences. American farmers, particularly soybean growers, found themselves directly in the crosshairs of retaliatory tariffs, which severely impacted their livelihoods. The government had to roll out billions of dollars in aid packages to try and cushion the blow, but this was a temporary fix for a deeper issue. The Made in America dream, fueled by tariffs, largely remained just that, a dream, with many industries struggling to adapt to the new economic landscape. And for many, an expensive one, as the costs of these policies were felt across various sectors and communities. Section 5. Your shopping cart feels the squeezed tariffs and the cost of living. The fundamental truth about tariffs is that someone has to pay for them. When the US government imposes a tariff on, say, washing machines imported from China, the US company importing those washing machines has to pay the tariff to the US government. That importer, now facing a higher cost for each machine, then has a choice: either make less profit or raise the price they charge to retailers. And guess what retailers do when their costs go up? They raise the prices for you. Numerous studies tracked the prices of goods subject to Trump's tariffs, and found that these tariffs were almost entirely passed through to US domestic prices. This meant that everyday items, from luggage and bicycles to furniture and electronics, became more expensive. The result was a subtle but persistent drain on household budgets across the country. Section 6. Global Trade Tremors: How US Tariffs Shook Our Partners. The impact of Trump's tariffs wasn't confined to the borders of the United States. These were tremors felt around the globe. China, of course, was a primary target of many of these tariffs, and it retaliated in kind, leading to a tit-for-tat trade war. However, it also hurt American businesses that relied on Chinese components or sold goods to China. Even traditional allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union found themselves on the receiving end of US tariffs, particularly on steel and aluminum. This caused considerable bewilderment and anger. The broader global impact was a slowdown in international trade growth. The US, once a champion of free trade, was now seen by many as a disruptive force, shaking the very foundations of the global economic order it had helped to build. Section 7. Developing economies caught in the tariff crossfire. While the headlines often focused on the trade battles between giants like the US and China, the ripple effects of Trump's tariffs also washed over many smaller developing nations. Many developing countries are integral parts of global supply chains. When tariffs disrupted these supply chains, demand for those initial inputs could fall, hitting producers in poorer nations hard. The overall message sent was one of instability, making it harder for these nations to plan for a sustainable economic future based on trade. Section 8. The Great Tariff Divide: Supporters versus Skeptics. Supporters of the tariffs often argued that they were a necessary evil, a tough medicine needed to cure the ills of unfair global trade practices. They saw the tariffs as a bold move to reassert American sovereignty and economic strength on the world stage. Proponents frequently pointed to the long-standing issue of China's trade practices, arguing that previous administrations had failed to adequately address these problems. The argument was that even if there were some short-term costs, the long-term benefits of a fairer, more balanced global trading system would ultimately outweigh them. On the other side, critics argued that tariffs are an inefficient and harmful policy tool. They pointed to the overwhelming historical evidence suggesting that trade wars are typically lost by all parties involved. The consensus among most economists was, and largely remains, that the tariffs did more harm than good to the U.S. economy overall. Section 9. Conclusion: Navigating the post-tariff economic landscape. The big takeaway is that these tariffs have had significant and largely negative consequences for both the U.S. and the global economy. The dream of a swift, painless America. First economic victory via import taxes has failed to materialize in the grand fashion it was sold. The data suggests that consumers largely bore the brunt of the costs through higher prices. U.S. businesses faced increased uncertainty in input costs, and many exporters, particularly in agriculture, suffered from retaliatory tariffs. Globally, the tariffs strained international relations, disrupted supply chains, and contributed to a slowdown in global trade growth. Moving forward, the challenge will be to find ways to promote fair and competitive trade that benefits American workers and businesses, without resorting to self-defeating protectionism. It's a delicate balancing act and one that requires more than just a sledgehammer.